kitchen light turned off behind me because I hadn't touched the switch and I was the only one in the house. At least, that's what I'd been telling myself for the past 6 hours, ever since my parents left for the weekend and trusted me to stay home alone for the first time. And it wasn't even that late yet, just past midnight, but the way the room fell into darkness felt deliberate, like someone had waited for me to look away from the doorway before flicking the switch down. And I remember standing there with the refrigerator humming beside me, telling myself it was just an electrical glitch, that old houses do that sometimes, that breakers slip, that wiring fails, except the microwave clock was still glowing green and the hallway lamp was still on, which meant the power hadn't gone out, only the kitchen light. And when I reached slowly toward the switch and pushed it back up, the bulb came on instantly, as if nothing had happened. And that was the first moment I felt that thin thread of doubt tighten in my chest, because lights don't usually turn themselves off so cleanly, not without flickering or buzzing, not without warning. And I stood there longer than I want to admit, just listening to the house breathe, the air vents ticking softly, the refrigerator cycling, the faint creak of wood adjusting to the cooler night air. And that's when I heard the sound upstairs. A single, slow footstep, directly above the kitchen, directly above me, measured and careful like someone testing their weight on unfamiliar boards. And I told myself it was the house settling again. But houses don't take steps, they don't shift from heel to toe, they don't pause, and then take another one slightly closer to the stairs. And I remember thinking that if someone had broken in, I would have heard a door or a window, I would have heard glass or the alarm, except the alarm panel by the front door was dark, because my dad never turned it on when we were home, and technically I was home, so it wasn't armed. And that realization felt like cold water down my back, and I found myself whispering hello toward the ceiling, even though I didn't expect an answer. And for a few seconds, there was nothing, and then there was another step, softer this time, like whoever it was had heard me too and was adjusting. And I don't know why, but instead of running outside, I turned off the kitchen light myself and stepped into the hallway so I could see the staircase clearly, because part of me believed that if there was someone up there, they wouldn't come down into the open, they would stay hidden. And if nothing came down, then maybe I could convince myself it had all been in my head. So I stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring up into the dim second-floor landing, where the nightlight cast a faint amber glow, and the hallway looked exactly the same as it always did. Family photos along the wall, the closed bathroom door, my bedroom door slightly open the way I'd left it earlier, and I counted to 30 in my head, waiting for movement, waiting for another sound. And when nothing happened, I almost laughed at myself for being dramatic. But as I reached the number 30, I noticed something I hadn't noticed before. My bedroom door wasn't slightly open anymore. It was wider, not fully open, just enough that the angle had changed. And I know the exact angle because I have a habit of leaving it cracked the width of my hand so the air circulates. And this was more than that. This was maybe a foot wide, and I tried to replay the last time I'd gone upstairs, trying to remember if I'd pushed it further without thinking, but the memory wouldn't settle. It felt slippery, and that's when I saw it. The faintest movement in the gap of the doorway. Not a shape exactly. More like a shadow shifting against a darker shadow, and I held my breath so long my ears started ringing, and nothing else moved. And I told myself, shadows change when clouds pass over. The moon, except the curtains upstairs were drawn, and there was no moonlight reaching that hallway anyway, just the small plastic nightlight plugged into the wall. And I realized then that whatever was happening wasn't loud or aggressive. It was careful. It was adjusting in small ways to see how much I would notice, how far it could go without forcing me to act. And that was somehow worse than if someone had just charged down the stairs, because it meant there was intention behind it, patience. And I didn't want to test how far that patience would stretch. So I did something that still makes my stomach tighten when I think about it. I turned around and went back into the living room and sat on the couch facing the staircase. And I decided I would not go upstairs again that night, no matter what I heard. Because if someone was up there, I didn't want to corner them. And if no one was up there, then I didn't want to feed whatever my mind was creating, and I left the TV off because the silence felt like information, like data I needed. And over the next hour, I heard small changes. Not footsteps exactly, but soft thuds, like drawers closing gently, like fabric brushing against a wall, like someone reorganizing a room they had no right to be in. And every time I stood up, halfway intending to grab my phone and call someone, I stopped myself because I didn't have anything concrete to say. I couldn't explain shadows and angles and careful steps without sounding unstable. And eventually, around 3 a.m, the sounds stopped completely, and the stillness that followed was so complete it felt staged, like a performance ending. And at some point I must have fallen asleep, sitting up, because I woke to pale sunlight filling the room, and the house looked normal again. Painfully normal, and for a moment I thought I dreamed it. But when I went upstairs, my bedroom door was wide open, and every drawer in my dresser was pulled out just slightly, not enough to spill anything, just enough to break the line, like someone had checked each one and left them that way on purpose, and nothing was missing. Nothing was broken, which made it worse because it meant whoever had been there hadn't wanted to take anything. They had wanted me to know they'd looked, and that was the first story, and I wish I could say it was the only time I felt that kind of presence while being home alone. But the second time happened months later in a different house across town after we moved. And I told myself, new houses come with new sounds, new settling patterns, new air currents. And for weeks, nothing strange happened. Until one rainy evening when my parents went out to dinner. And I stayed behind again, older now, less eager to prove I was brave. And I had developed a rule for myself after the first house. A simple rule that made me feel in control. If I heard something unexplained, I would immediately investigate it, not wait, not sit and let it grow in my head. I would turn on every light and check every room, so there would be no lingering doubt. And that system worked for a while, until the night the knocking started. 3 soft knocks on the back door, spaced evenly, like someone tapping politely. And I was in the kitchen again when it happened, and I froze, because the backyard was fenced and locked, and no one ever came to the back door without calling first. And I looked at the clock, 9:17 p.m., too early for it to be imagination fueled by exhaustion. And I walked slowly to the glass pane and pulled the curtain aside just a fraction. And there was no one there, just rain streaking down the glass and the porch light reflecting off wet concrete. And I opened the door quickly to prove to myself that the knocking had been a branch or loose siding, but there was nothing within reach of the door that could have hit it. And when I closed it and locked it again, I felt silly. Until exactly 3 minutes later, there were 3 more knocks. Same rhythm. Same softness. And this time I didn't look outside. I stepped back into the kitchen and watched the door from a distance. And I noticed something I hadn't before. The knocks weren't coming from the outside. They were slightly muffled, slightly hollow, like they were coming from within the door itself. And the thought slid into my mind so quietly I almost missed it. What if someone was already inside? And the knocking wasn't asking to be let in, but testing the structure. And I hated that idea so much. I grabbed a chair and wedged it under the handle, even though it opened outward and the chair wouldn't actually stop anything. It just made me feel less exposed. And I stood there waiting for the next set, but it didn't come. Instead, I heard a faint echo of the same pattern from somewhere deeper in the house. 3 knocks from the hallway wall, distant and dampened. And I realized with growing dread that the sound wasn't tied to the door at all. It was tied to me. It was following my position in the house, always from the nearest surface. Never loud enough to confirm, just enough to register. And I moved deliberately into the living room and waited. And after a long pause, there were 3 gentle taps against the inside of the front door. And my rule about investigating immediately suddenly felt dangerous. Because if I moved again, it would just relocate, always adjacent, always close, but never visible. And I tested something then. I walked into the center of the living room, away from walls and doors, and stood perfectly still. And the house was silent for almost a full minute before I heard the softest triple knock directly beneath my feet from the floorboards. And that was when I understood that whatever it was didn't need walls, it just needed proximity. And I don't remember deciding to leave. I just remember grabbing my keys and stepping out into the rain and sitting in my car with the doors locked, watching the house from the driveway. And from outside it looked peaceful. Warm light glowing in the windows. No movement, no shadows. And the knocking never followed me into the car. It stopped the moment I crossed the threshold. And it never happened again after that night. At least, not in that house. And the third time was the quietest and somehow the worst, because there were no sounds at all, just changes, small corrections to reality that made me question my own memory. And by then I was living alone in a small apartment on the 3rd floor, far from my parents' houses. And I had developed more rules over time. Like always locking the bathroom door when I showered, even if no one else was home. Like checking the closets before bed. Like taking pictures of rooms when I left for the day, so I could compare them later if something felt off. And that last habit started as a joke, but became serious the night I came home from work, and felt immediately that the air in the apartment was wrong. Not colder or warmer, just arranged differently, like furniture had shifted even though it hadn't. And I opened the photo from that morning on my phone and compared it to the living room in front of me. And at first, everything matched. Couch, coffee table, lamp, bookshelf, all aligned the same. Until I noticed the bookshelf had one extra item on the second shelf from the top, a thin black notebook I didn't recognize. And I stood there, staring at it, convinced I must have forgotten buying it, that maybe I'd set it there days ago and only just noticed. But when I checked the morning photo again, the shelf had been empty in that spot. And the timestamp confirmed it had been taken just hours earlier. And I felt that old thread tighten in my chest again as I stepped closer to the shelf and reached for the notebook, half expecting it to vanish like a trick of light. But it was solid in my hand, unmarked. No title, no branding, just plain black. And when I opened it, I found the first page filled with handwriting that looked disturbingly like mine, the same slant, the same uneven spacing, and the sentence written across the top was simple. You always notice eventually. And I flipped through the rest of the pages expecting more. But they were blank. And I stood there for a long time trying to rationalize it. Maybe I'd written it absent-mindedly. Maybe stress was playing games with my memory. Maybe I'd sleepwalked. But deep down, I knew I hadn't bought that notebook. And I hadn't written those words. And over the next few days, more small additions appeared. Never dramatic, never destructive, just present. A glass moved an inch to the left. A chair angled slightly differently. A new spoon in the drawer that matched none of my sets. And each time I checked the photos and confirmed the differences, and each time I found a new sentence in the notebook, always in that same handwriting, documenting my reactions in calm detail. He hesitated before touching the shelf. He checked the timestamp twice. He is starting to create rules again. And I realized with growing horror that the notebook wasn't just commenting, it was anticipating. Because one evening before I had the chance to take my usual photo before leaving for work, I found a fresh line written on the next blank page. Tomorrow he will stop taking pictures, and I don't know why. But that sentence unsettled me more than all the others combined, because it suggested an understanding of my patterns deeper than my own. And the next morning I stood in the doorway with my phone in my hand, debating whether to prove it wrong. And in that hesitation I felt watched in a way that had nothing to do with eyes and everything to do with awareness. Like something in the apartment was paying attention, not just to where I stood, but to what I intended. And I lowered my phone without taking the picture. And I left. And when I came back that evening, the notebook had one final addition he chose not to see, and the rest of the pages were gone, torn cleanly out. And the shelf where the notebook had rested was empty again, as if it had never existed. And I searched the entire apartment for the missing pages, but found nothing. And from that day on, there were no more objects appearing, no more sentences, no more obvious signs, just the quiet, steady feeling that whatever had been observing me had learned enough. And sometimes late at night, when I'm alone and the apartment is silent, I think about the first house and the drawers left slightly open, about the second house and the knocking that followed me from surface to surface, about the third place and the notebook that wrote back. And I can't shake the sense that these weren't separate events, but stages, small experiments in how much I would tolerate before leaving, how long I would stay in a space that subtly reshaped itself around me. And now when something minor shifts in my current place, when a door seems a little wider than I remember, or a chair angled just slightly wrong, I don't rush to fix it. I don't investigate immediately. I don't take pictures, because part of me understands that noticing is participation. And sometimes in the quietest moments, I feel that same patient presence waiting just beyond the edge of my awareness, not moving, not knocking, just observing, to see whether this time I'll pretend everything is exactly where I left it. Subscribe to this channel for more stories if this is your first time.